Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello, welcome to the Compass Points podcast, the weekly news and information show brought to you by the fine folks at CompassKnox.com. Those fine folks are me, Jesse Mayshark, and my friend and colleague Scott Barker. How are you doing today, Scott?
Doing okay, considering the heat.
Considering the heat, it is warm. We are taping this on Friday afternoon, and I just want to mention up front that, of course, the big earth-shaking news that happened today was the Supreme Court ruling in the abortion case out of Mississippi that has effectively overturned the Roe versus Wade decision. We are not going to be talking about that today because we're talking about local issues. However, we will be following up on that, and we have written in past weeks and discussed in past weeks the local impacts of that. We will certainly be writing about that, and we'll probably have more to talk about on that next week. But I want to acknowledge that because I feel like that's going to be mostly what people are talking about this weekend. On to things that we are going to talk about. On the local government front, this past week we had some discussion by County Commission about the Sheriff's Merit System Council. We're going to talk about that. Scott, you just came from meetings of the University of Tennessee Board of Trustees, so we'll hear a little bit about what they've been up to. We had an interesting footnote to a lawsuit that was filed earlier this year in the school masking case. And then we're going to have a pretty good Q&A in our podcast segment, right?
Yes, we are. We're going to have Chief Paul Noel, the new head of the Knoxville Police Department. He'll be here to talk with us. And actually, he was here on Zoom a few days ago. But we're going to talk to him. We also had a Q&A on Compass at our website, www.CompassKnox.com, and this is kind of an extension of that discussion.
You don't have to say www anymore. I think people know.
Do I
that.
not? Well, I'm old.
I'm not sure if the kids even know that that's a thing.
They probably don't.
All right. So kicking off the Merit System Council, and I'll try to make this as brief as possible because this has been like 18 months of political and legal wrangling over this thing. The Merit System Council is, at the moment anyway, a 3-member body made up of volunteers appointed by County Commission that serves as a grievance body, as essentially a civil service body for employees of the Knox County Sheriff's Office, especially uniformed employees, but all employees, all classified employees of the Knox County Sheriff's Office. If they feel, and the Merit System Council is there to protect against political interference, against political retaliation. Basically, what this was set up in the early 70s to do was, a new sheriff gets elected, comes into office, and immediately goes and fires or demotes everybody who he knows or suspects of having voted for his opponent in the previous election. This is the kind of thing that civil service systems in general are set up to do, is protect people who work for public bodies from political retaliation or pressure. So that's what it does. If somebody who works for the sheriff's office thinks, hey, I've had my pay cut, I've been demoted, I've been somehow materially disadvantaged for political reasons, they can file a grievance with the Merit System Council. it is supposed to be non-political. The whole idea of this is to take politics out of it, but almost inevitably, politics enters into it. It enters into who wants to serve on the council, who gets appointed by county commission, who some particular sheriff may want or not want to serve on the council. Not that they get a say in it, but of course they can make their opinions known to county commissioners. And so most recently, current Sheriff Tom Spangler has been at odds with the makeup, the people who have been on the Merit System Council for the last few years, because he suspected them of being allies of former Sheriff Jimmy J.J. Jones. There were several grievances filed over the past year to 18 months by employees of the sheriff's office who had been close to Jones when he was sheriff and who felt like they were mistreated by Spangler. In one case, it was an employee, Martha Dooley, who had her county-issued car taken away from her. Two other cases they were actually dismissed for assorted wrongdoings and said that they had been targeted because they were former allies of Jones. And the Merit System Council itself was made up of people who Spangler thought were also close to Jones and were biased against him. There was all sorts of wrangling. This went to Chancery Court, back and forth about what cases the Merit Council could hear or couldn't hear. And finally, that council in April ruled in the Martha Dooley case about her car, said she should have her car back, which to, I think, Spangler and his supporters just reinforced what they thought, that this was a group of people who were biased against him. Of course, the people on the council said, no, they're not. Anyway, what happened was in the May 3rd Knox County Republican primary, J.J. Jones, in seeking a return to office, was roundly, soundly defeated by Spangler by a 71 to 29% margin, just a spanking, you can say. Spangler's old nickname was Spanky, and he administered a spanking on Election Day. Immediately after that, Martha Dooley, who had just won her case at the Merit System Council, said, never mind about the car, I'm retiring, because she felt like she had been mistreated under Spangler, and once it was clear he was going to be reelected, she retired. Two of those other pending cases were immediately pulled, which, did reinforce the sense, or the appearance anyway, that a lot of this was political maneuvering by supporters of Jones to try to make Spangler look bad. So anyway, County Commission has been talking for more than a year about how to get a handle on this situation and make the Merit System Council the non-political body that it's supposed to be. There are a couple of proposals before Commission that they talked about at their work session last week and that they're going to vote on at their upcoming meeting on Monday. One of those from Commissioner Larson J. would expand the council from 3 to 7 members and would also put some new pretty stringent prohibitions on political activity by anybody serving on that council. As it's written right now, and this could all change, but you couldn't have been an employee of either the Sheriff's Office or the Knoxville Police Department for the past 10 years. You cannot be active in any way as a volunteer for any local political campaign, not just sheriff, but they don't want anyone who's involved in local politics at all, they say, or Larson J. says anyway, he's the one who wrote this draft, and couldn't even have a yard sign. And so there was some discussion on Commission, would this be limiting their pool too much? Is anybody going to want to serve on this thing if they kind of have to give up all of... Because a lot of the people who have served on this in the past have been people who are politically active in various ways. So anyway, that's what's going on with the Merit System Council. If you've seen our headlines, but you haven't dived into the stories because you're like, I don't really know or understand what's going on here. That's the gist of it. And I guess, Scott, this is just one of those weird little bodies that exists in local government. It's all volunteered. I mean, they do have some paid staff, but the people on the council aren't even paid. But it can have these sort of like outsized political effects.
Yeah, and one of the things that's striking about it to me is it's a poster child for unintended consequences, because it, as you mentioned, it was formed to take the politics out of the sheriff's departments across the state. And then here it's not only political, but it's even more convolutedly political than the previous system. I mean, previously, you knew when a new sheriff came in, he was going to fire people who didn't like him and hire people he did, and everybody just kind of accepted that, which was not a good situation to be in.
No, because they were hiring friends
No, I
and
mean,
relatives.
it was
Like,
terrible.
I think there's a very good argument for having a civil
I'm
service
not
system,
arguing
for sure.
against it. Don't get me wrong, but the system as it has evolved since it was started is no less political, but everything's a lot murkier, and there's a lot more intrigue about the politics. Whereas before it was just naked power. Now it's kind of stealth power.
Well, and one point that Commissioner Terry Hill made in talking about this was no matter what they do to the Merit System Council itself, she thinks that it's not going to resolve a lot of the issues and complaints that commissioners hear from people in the sheriff's office, because the only kinds of offenses, the only kinds of grievances that people can bring are pretty restricted. It has to be that you actually lost pay, that you were somehow, negatively affected in a material way. And of course, there's a lot of things that a sheriff can do. It's a big department. You can move people around. It's very clear that lateral transfers, which basically means no loss of sort of like position or pay, especially pay, are allowed. And as Terry Hill said, and she used the phrase "crap job," which is not something you often hear at public meetings, but I think it was well phrased, because she said what this really comes down to is somebody gets transferred to a crap job and they don't like it and they complain about it, and that's going to happen anyway, regardless of what they do to the Merit System Council.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of a situation in the HBO TV series The Wire, where there was a cop who was he bent the rules quite a bit and got crosswise, but he produced results, but his supervisors, once one of the cases was settled out, decided to transfer him to the boat squad,
Right. Yes,
where he had to patrol. He had to patrol the harbor in Baltimore instead of
Literally
going out
took
and
him
fighting
off
crime.
the streets.
Yeah, I mean, it was he didn't cut his pay, didn't affect his seniority, nothing like that. But that's wasn't the most desirable assignment for someone who really can produce results actually fighting crime. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's kind of, that's kind of a similar thing.
We certainly have real life illustrations.
There are real life illustrations.
I remember years ago, people may remember that former police chief Phil Keith one time was pulled over by one of his own officers on suspicion of driving under the influence. And that was a big controversy back in the late 90s. People can go look it up if they want. But a few weeks later, it transpired that the officer who made the stop had been reassigned to foot patrol duty down by the homeless mission. So these things happen, and that kind of thing can happen regardless of having a Merit System Council. All right, so let's talk about the Board of Trustees. You just got in from 2 days of meetings.
I just got in right before we started taping this. Spent 2 days at the Board of Trustees annual meetings at the UT campus. This is where they get most of their business done. The biggest news came the first day on Thursday, when the athletic department announced that the Kneeland Stadium renovations would be much bigger than it had been before. It's going from $180 million to $280 million. A lot more amenities and things like premium seating and enlarging concourses
and places for people to spend money.
Places for people to spend money. That's how they're going to pay for it. But it's one of the things is that they're trying to capitalize on the perceived momentum that the football program has, and they also talked about things like this was for the first time they won the All Sports Trophy. The University of Tennessee won the All Sports Trophy in the SEC, which they haven't done before. and that's all sports. So they're wanting to build on that. They're getting a lot of good response from donors. Apparently, according to athletic director Danny White, the name, imaging, likeness giving hasn't had an appreciable effect on donors giving money to projects like this. So they're going forward with that. Of course, UT being UT, that overshadows a lot of the other things like
their academic
their academic
programs.
academic programs. But also their budget for next year is about $3 billion. So it's the largest in history. They have the largest outlays from the state that they've had. So they're
of course, that's partly because they have another campus that they didn't have 2 years ago.
They have another campus, yes. They added UT Southern in Pulaski. We'll get back to that in just a second. But they did that. They also got all the funding for the Oak Ridge research initiative that they've got with ORNL. They were supposed to get $72 million over the next 8 years. They got it all at once instead. So
state funding.
Yeah. That's state funding. They get all kinds of other funding as well. But anyway, all of those things came out. They had President Randy Boyd had his job performance glowing. One of the things that and Board Chair John Compton does the performance evaluation. He cited the increased enrollment across the board at UT, which is kind of bucking the national trend. He cited the launch of UT Southern as another feather in Boyd's cap. The one thing that was kind of funny, there was a knock on Boyd, and that's that sometimes he wants to move a lot faster than the university community is comfortable with or can handle, actually. And the funny thing about that was on Thursday, when they talked about the excitement around the UT football program, all they could talk about was Josh Heupel's high-speed offense when that it moved at the fastest pace of any offense in the country, and that generated all this excitement. And then they turn around the next day, and one of the knocks on Boyd was, hey, he moves a little too fast.
Right.
So, but
there's a place for high-speed offense and a place where you want something a little more deliberative. Right? Well, and I feel like this has been a bit of a tension with Boyd from the beginning. He's had several instances. One of them was the merging of the agricultural campus with the main campus, for example, where he kind of got ahead of where people were comfortable, or there were some stakeholders who felt like they hadn't been adequately consulted and so forth.
Yeah, and that's kind of I think that goes back to his business background, because he came from the business world, not the world of academia. In the business world, things move a lot faster. You can be a lot more nimble, and one of the things to that is the it kind of speaks to that, and this really didn't come up that much in the meetings, although there was one faculty member who addressed it during the public forum session, and that's the idea that's being floated of splitting the College of Arts and Sciences at the university's Knoxville campus, and they're possibly because of the Institute of Agriculture incident. The assumption among a lot of faculty is that it's already a done deal, and that any stakeholder input is kind of window dressing, and there may be something to that. I don't know, but I think that's kind of a residual effect of that, because Boyd does like to move fast.
Right. Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention just about the stadium, I think it's interesting. We talk about they're doing a $288 million expansion renovation to Kneeland Stadium, which is 3 times larger than the total cost of the brand new baseball stadium we're talking about downtown, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot more, but there are also some big problems with Kneeland Stadium. One of the things they're doing is the lower deck on the west side of the field. The concrete was poured 100 years ago. It's in terrible shape. They're basically going to rip that out, put new premium seating in, and for the people that can afford the bucks to get into those seats, they're also going to have a little indoor club area. It's air conditioned. I say little, it's 12,000 square feet. But it's going to be air conditioned. It's going to have bars and concession stands and restaurants and so all kinds of great things, which is one of the things that's going to push the cost a lot higher than it was originally.
Sure. All right. Well, and I guess the other thing we should mention there is that they, once again, are not having a tuition increase, right?
They are not. It's funny, Boyd, during the meeting today, made his pitch for that to be the headline for any stories that came out of it. Of course, we've already written about that, but
it was the headline on the press release
yeah,
that UT sent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that is a big deal. I mean, that there is no tuition increase. And an even bigger deal to me, and I wrote about this as well already, is that that almost half of UT students at Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Martin, at those campuses, graduate with no debt. Mm-hmm. And the bigger thing is that Tennessee is the number one state in the country for financial student aid on a per student basis. Mm-hmm. Better than any other state. There are very few categories of education that you can say that the state of Tennessee is number one.
Yeah.
Usually it's more toward the other end. Yeah. So that was kind of a big deal, I thought.
Sure. All right. Well, and I wanted to mention quickly, we did have a final note in a lawsuit related to the school mask case from this past year. And for those who have forgotten, there was an initial lawsuit filed last fall by a group of students and their parents against the Knox County school system for not taking what they considered appropriate public health measures in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. That led to an injunction from a federal judge, U.S. District Judge J. Ronnie Greer, that basically imposed a mask requirement on students and teachers in all Knox County schools for most of this past school year. That led to months and months of many members of the school board were upset about this. A lot of parents were upset about it. At a certain point, Knox County, toward the end, as we came out of the kind of Omicron wave, Knox County was one of the only one of the only large school systems in the state that still had a mask mandate by the end, because it had been put in place by a federal judge. It wasn't something the school board could change. One of the wrinkles, and that got settled in April. There was a settlement, which of course we wrote about, and you can find that at CompassKnox.com, but there was a settlement with the people who brought the original case that led to the mask mandate being lifted and that original lawsuit being dismissed. But along the way, there was another lawsuit filed in February by a group called Unmasked Knox County Kids. This was a group led by a woman named Angie Godert, who has identified herself on social media as the local leader of Moms for Liberty, which is a conservative activist group that has been especially active in Williamson County and trying to get some books pulled from schools and things like that. And this lawsuit by Unmasked Knox County Kids was strongly promoted by County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and State Representative Jason Zachary, who each contributed $5,000 toward hiring a California law firm run by a woman named Harmeet Dillon, who is a well-known conservative activist and often appears on Fox News. And so her law firm was supposed to come in and provide some way to get this mask mandate lifted that the Knox County Law Department had not discovered. And they filed a lawsuit really aimed at Judge Greer's order, but you can't sue a federal judge for issuing an order. That's not an actionable item. You might not like the order, but you just like nobody upset about the abortion decision can file a lawsuit against the Supreme Court for their decision. So what this group did was they sued the school board, and their cause of action was that the school board was complying with the federal court order, which always seemed like a bit of an odd. Your legal claim is that you're suing the school board because they're doing what a federal judge told them they had to do. So once the mask case got settled, that group, Unmasked Knox County Kids, moved to dismiss their own suit, basically saying, okay, well, this is over and done. But the Knox County Law Department, which had also been fighting the mask mandate, said, wait a minute, because the Knox County Law Department had to devote some time and resources to responding to this other lawsuit from Unmasked Knox County kids, since they had sued the school board, which the law department represents. And so the law department said, wait a minute, not so fast. Don't just dismiss that case, Judge. We think the Knox County Law Department, should be able to recover our attorney fees from this group because they wasted our time with a frivolous lawsuit. It said right in the county's complaint that this lawsuit was preposterous. Now, again, this is a lawsuit that was promoted heavily by County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, who, of course, the county law department also represents sometimes. And so you had the law department saying that a lawsuit promoted by the county mayor was preposterous and that they should be able to recover attorney fees out of funds that were partly donated by County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. And Judge Greer came back this past week and said, no, this whole thing's over and done with. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss this. The county cannot recover attorney fees, but sort of on his way to slamming the door on the whole thing, Greer went out of his way to say that he did agree with the county law department that other lawsuit was meritless, and he called it a political orchestration under the veneer of a federal lawsuit. So that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin, I guess, of the entire mask controversy over the past year.
Yeah, and that, plus the Sheriff's Merit Council thing. Yeah, politics sometimes in Knox County can get very convoluted and oftentimes doesn't make sense. But there are representatives, so we follow them.
And often, in the case of the Merit Council, for example, there was a point there where taxpayers were literally paying for lawyers on opposite sides of the same case because it was the sheriff versus the Merit System Council. Both of them are under the county. We paid for the whole thing. Commissioner Larson J. said that the total cost of the legal action in the Merit System Council cases came to nearly $500,000, which essentially went to pay lawyers and didn't really end up materially affecting much of anything. Anyway, speaking of law enforcement, let's move on to our guest interview for the week.
Yeah, our guest this week is going to be Police Chief Paul Noel. As I said earlier, he's going to be kind of expanding on the Q&A that we published earlier in the week. He's covering some new ground, a little bit overlap, but a lot of it's new ground, and had a really interesting time talking with him.
Hi, our guest this week is Knoxville's new police chief, Paul Noel, who's been on the job for a little more than a week after coming here from the New Orleans Police Department, where he spent the past 25 years in his career. Welcome, Chief Noel, both to Knoxville and to the Compass Points podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
Well, first of all, since you're new here, we'll start off with kind of an easy one. What are your first impressions of both Knoxville as a city and of the Knoxville Police Department as a law enforcement agency?
So sure. So for the city, I'm very, very impressed with all of the amenities that Knoxville has to offer. Now, I do have to be honest, when I came in for my interview, it was snowing. It was about 40 degrees. The dogwoods were blooming. The city looked amazing. And now it's about 118,000 degrees. So, but, I really, on a serious note, I really enjoy all the amenities that the city has to offer. I love all of the green space. I love to hike. I love to cycle, and I love to walk around downtown. And I really enjoy the downtown area. I've eaten at many of the restaurants downtown. I haven't had a chance to get out to Smokies yet, or walk on some of the different greenways, but I can't wait to take advantage of that. As far as the police department goes, I'm very impressed with the organization. I think we have a very good group of men and women who are very dedicated to the city of Knoxville, to KPD, and the profession of policing as a whole. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to really enhance that.
Okay, what go through for our listeners who haven't been following the developments on our website, although they we hope that they do. Talk about your crime fighting approach. What is kind of your guiding philosophy?
Sure, so absolutely. So, I believe that, everything that we do when we approach crime fighting, geographic location, small neighborhoods are really so important. So I absolutely believe that everything we do, we should do within partnership with the community. So working hand in hand with members of the community to solve problems. Now, there's several things that we need to do here in the city of Knoxville. Obviously, violent crime is the absolute top priority. And it's one of the first things I'm looking at from an analytics perspective, from a deployment perspective, and from a tactical perspective. What can we do better to reduce the level of violent crime in the city of Knoxville?
I wanted to ask, and we've had some questions from some readers curious specifically about your thoughts about the department's relationships with minority and sort of marginalized communities. Obviously, I think police departments all over the country, certainly New Orleans is no different, have history of some racial tensions. Can you talk about specifically the Black community, the growing Latino community that we have here, and then also the LGBTQ community? Each of them have kind of their own specific concerns and histories of dealing with law enforcement. And how do you see KPD engaging with all of those?
Sure. So I think that's where the partnerships are so important. So I think, sometimes, we look at cities like Knoxville, cities like New Orleans from the city perspective, or just East Knoxville or West Knoxville or North or South, when really those communities are really broken down at a much smaller level. And each one of those micro locations really has their own unique set of not only community leaders, but concerns, problems, and things that, challenges that we need to work toward. So the first piece of that is really getting to know the people in the community, finding out the problems from their perspective, and then working together to try to work on those challenges. And I think, those partnerships are so important. What we can't do is go in and say, we have a preconceived idea of what's going to work. We really have to do that with the community. I'll give you a brief example of that. So in New Orleans, really in 2016, we identified 3 areas in New Orleans, which is a fairly big city, where most of our violence, especially our gun violence, was concentrated. So we had, some ideas about what we wanted to do to reduce gun violence in those areas. But we partnered with those community leaders, and we sat down with the faith-based leaders. We sat down with the members of the community, and we said, here are the problems, and this is what we think we need to do. But we got their perspective. And I remember a pastor from one of the neighborhoods saying, Chief, we don't need all your data analytics and everything else. I know who's committing crimes in these neighborhoods. And that partnership really helped us get that valuable information from the community. And by going to them before we started putting those strategies together, we really got that buy-in from members of the community. We worked on a plan that we all agreed on. And then once we start implementing those crime and violence reduction strategies in those really small neighborhoods, as we went through bumps in the road, we were all together. And that was something that was very successful for us in New Orleans, not just with significant reductions in violent crime in those neighborhoods, but also with being able to increase the trust and legitimacy within those communities. So I think that's something that we absolutely could do, not only in minority communities, but in Latino communities, with LGBTQ communities as well. It's the same principle that we could use to really help establish and build that trust with those communities as we work to solve problems. But everything really needs to be wrapped around those collaboration, but also problem solving as well.
Another community that is marginalized, the homeless community in Knoxville. A lot of people in Knoxville, of course, that's a much broader issue than just law enforcement, but a lot of people in Knoxville are watching and are concerned about how the Knoxville Police Department interacts with the homeless community. Now, you have, we think our problem is bad here. You have seen much worse, because you were in New Orleans post-Katrina when the homeless population grew from 2,000 to 12,000 overnight, and has since come down. Now, that's been a citywide effort with lots of agencies and all, but what would be your approach from a law enforcement perspective on helping the city deal with homelessness?
Great question. So that's something that I've seen firsthand. On last Wednesday, I rode with an officer from the West District. On last Thursday, I rode with an officer from East District. I've driven personally around the Mission area a lot. And yesterday evening, I spent a lot of time walking with our officers assigned to the Central Business District, walking in Market Square, walking in the different parks, walking on Gay Street, going all through Old City. And, so I really got to see, the homeless problem firsthand. So you're absolutely right. That's not a problem that the Knoxville Police Department can do alone. I really believe in, that that's really a public health problem. So we need to work together with the other agencies within the Knoxville city government, work with our non-governmental service providers, and really, to do everything we can to put people in a position to get the help that they need. That's why I'm a big supporter of the co-responder model that we have in the city of Knoxville. We also have the BHUC, where we could bring people who are in crisis, in lieu of bringing them to jail, we could bring them to the BHUC where they can start to get help right away. But I also recognize that we do need to do a better job of being visible downtown and also enforcing some of the public order crimes as well downtown. So that's absolutely something I'm going to be looking at. Like I said, I looked at it firsthand yesterday. There's a lot more that KPD can do to be more responsive, and I'm committed to making those changes.
One thing that, as a follow-up on that, one thing that I saw that the New Orleans Police Department does is they have a unit that actually transports people who are without homes to their maybe doctor's appointments or therapy appointments or whatever. That there's kind of a transportation aspect to that. Is that something you might consider here, or is that something that is best left to the social service agencies? What do you see replicating that or making it here in Knoxville?
So those resources were a tremendous asset in New Orleans. Those were staffed by volunteers. I think there was one full-time employee. The rest was staffed by volunteers. I think that's an excellent resource. Being completely honest, I think that's probably better left to city government or someone that's, I don't know if necessarily agree that the police should be heading up all of those efforts, because sometimes there's some trust issues with the police and members of that community. But that really was a great resource. And again, it all goes back to the most important thing, with the co-responder model or the BHUC or whatever type of resource like that we use. It's about trying to pair up the consumer with the appropriate level of resources, ultimately to try to change the behavior. And we want to, try to get as many people the help they need, whether they need help, finding a home, whether they need help with a job, whether they need help with really getting back on their feet with, struggling with mental health or drug addiction or other things like that, trying to change that behavior so we're not dealing with the same individual over and over again out on our street running into problems.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about school security. KPD has officers in most of the schools within city limits. Obviously, I'm sure you've heard about the incident last year with Anthony Thompson Jr. at Austin East High School, which put a lot of scrutiny on that whole relationship. And then more recently, of course, we've had the horrible school shooting in Texas that kind of raised concerns from like the other side of that, of having sufficient security. I know that's a complicated relationship, having the officer in the school. You're dealing with school officials and concerns of parents and so forth. But I guess what is your philosophy for the role of those officers in the school and how they need to engage with those communities?
Sure. So I'm still evaluating this. So I'm actually meeting with the school security chief tomorrow, and we're going to discuss some of these things. But, I guess my overall philosophy is, I'm for police officers being in schools, but we should be in schools for positive reasons. We should be in schools that have positive relationships with students, forming like those mentorship roles, like we're going to really have to help like boost recruiting, help, mentor kids, read to kids, help them with their homework and other things like that. I don't believe that police should be in schools to be a part of the disciplinary process. It's not, what police officers, it's not our primary role. But like I said, I'm going to be meeting with the school security chief tomorrow to discuss how KPD interacts with the school system. And, so it's a little premature to get into that until I meet with him.
One kind of sort of related issue is Jesse mentioned the Thompson case. The internal affairs investigation is still going on. It's been a year and a half. I know you recently kind of made a slight change in how the internal affairs unit reports. Now they report to Assistant Chief Fortner, and talk about it sometimes seems that it takes a long time for internal affairs investigations to be complete. That one was complicated by a criminal investigation and prosecution as well. But overall, is streamlining and perhaps accelerating some of these investigations going to be a priority for you?
It absolutely will. So, internal affairs was now placed directly under Assistant Chief Fortner. But I want to be absolutely clear that the responsibility for discipline and the final say in disciplinary matters and the final say in these investigations is always going to be with me as the Chief of Police. But the daily management of the internal affairs unit was reported directly to me. And let's just, be honest, I'm busy every day doing things like this, going out in the community. It's not fair for the internal affairs unit when they need to meet with their boss. They have to wait for me to become available to sit and go over a case. So that's why it was so important to have them report directly to Assistant Chief Fortner. But again, all disciplinary responsibility is still the buck's going to stop with me on all of those decisions. We absolutely are committed to moving those cases quicker, but we're not going to compromise the quality of those investigations. The quality is the most important thing, but we do recognize that we need to move those cases quicker. And Assistant Chief Fortner is going to lead those efforts. And I think you're going to see disciplinary cases, especially new disciplinary cases, move in a much more timely manner. And, one of the things I did this weekend was read old disciplinary cases to get up to speed so we can start the process of getting those disciplinary system cases that have been sitting in the system for a while, getting those moving so we could start adjudicating those old cases.
Is is one aspect of the active bystander training that you have said you're going to be instituting, is one aspect of that to reduce the number of internal affairs investigations that there would be? I mean, I would think that if that training is successful and officers nip problems in the bud in the field, so to speak, then that could reduce the number of internal affairs investigations.
That's the hope. So the byproduct long term, that's not going to happen overnight. In fact, the ABLE training, we're going to be incorporating that into our 2023 training schedule. So that's something that takes a while to train because we do it in such small groups. But the long-term byproduct of that should be that we have fewer complaints because, as like I said, we're intervening in the field to prevent mistakes and prevent misconduct before they occur.
All right. Well, we know you're busy. You're still getting your feet on the ground here. So we appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to talk with us. And I'm sure we will be checking back in with you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
All right. Thanks again to Chief Noel for speaking with us. And of course, we will be watching as he matures in that job. And I think as we've said before, it will be interesting to see how he handles whatever inevitable crises arise, because we know that there will be some.
Yeah, there will be crises. That's the nature of the job. And also it'll be interesting to see what changes he will end up making at KPD. He will be making some. So it'll be interesting to see how, what forms they take, how they're accepted not only in KPD but in the community at large. And he's only been on the job a couple of weeks, so we've got plenty of time to follow him and see what develops.
Sure. Well, now we're to the reader question segment of the podcast. Every week on Thursdays, we invite subscribers on our subscriber-only Facebook group, Compass Colloquy, one of the many amenities available to subscribers. And you can find subscription information at CompassKnox.com. So we invite people to tell us what's on their mind, anything in particular they want to hear about. We got a question this week about, it was specifically about the county mayor's race between incumbent County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and Democratic candidate Debbie Helsley. And Helsley has made a point of saying that Jacobs is refusing to debate her, so we're not going to have a debate between the two major party candidates for county mayor ahead of the August 4th general election. And I'm actually going to be talking to Glenn Jacobs in this coming week, and that's one of the things that I will ask him about. But I think this speaks to a phenomenon that we have seen, and it's maybe always been true to some degree, but I feel like there is less of a sense from candidates running for office these days that they have any obligation at all to appear at debates or forums, especially ones that are also going to feature their opponent.
Yeah, well, there's always been a reluctance on the part of incumbents, especially incumbents who are well-funded and and popular, to debate their opponents because they think that would elevate them to their level. In Jacobs' sense, Jacobs had no opposition. He is the incumbent. He is very well funded. He will have support from most of the Republicans, if not all, in Knox County, and the past more than a decade, that's been enough to get you elected countywide. Yeah. So there's no real upside to him to debating from that traditional way. But there has been, in recent years, even those who aren't incumbents are not debating.
And this is particularly Republicans, we should say. It's much more on one part. And there are some Republican candidates who have shown up at debates and forums and will probably continue to. But it seems like there's been, in particular in the Republican Party, maybe because they're the dominant party locally and they feel like their best political play is to just ignore, kind of pretend that there isn't really any opposition. But I thought that was really interesting. We saw that in city council races last year where you had candidates who were not as well known running against better known incumbents who still didn't come to forums that you would have thought would have been an opportunity for them to introduce themselves and get their name out there a little more.
Yeah, and I think one of the beefs that a lot of Republicans have is with the League of Women Voters, which the League of Women Voters puts on debates and forums every election cycle and
all
years.
Over the country too.
All over the country and also here. They're a nonpartisan organization, although there are some Republicans who think that it's really a Democratic partisan organization in disguise, and so they just refuse to participate in anything that the league does. Now it's easier to do that when your party wins, countywide elections, or you represent a district that is primarily Republican. It's easier to take that stance, but I think that's been happening more and more. And as you mentioned, the lesser known candidates in the city council races last year were essentially Republicans. I mean, they were recruited by
themselves.
They branded themselves Republicans. They were recruited by the Republican Party. And even though that city council races are nonpartisan, technically, they ran as a block, a Republican block, and they stayed away from most debates as a block for the most part.
Yep. So, I mean, as reporters, I think we probably prefer for people to show up at debates and forums, just because we believe in people having access to their elected officials and people who are running for office. We think that people who are running for office, whether they're incumbents or not, should be subjected to scrutiny and accountability, and forums and debates are one way that can happen. But it does seem like we're headed for some times where we just may not have any actual forums at all, where you have both people or all three people or however many running for the same office actually on the same stage.
Yeah, answering the same questions in the same amount of time, and it's great as a reporter, I think, because you can get those if whatever the questions are, you have what one person says and what their opponent says, and that's and then you can easily put that into a story and let your readers make their decisions on their own without your interference or anything. But it's awfully difficult when somebody shows up and they're debating themselves. That's kind of.
And one thing I would say is, to the degree that the concerns are about one particular organization hosting events, anybody can organize a forum. And so, for example, if Mayor Jacobs wanted to organize a forum hosted by whatever group, my guess is that probably Debbie Helsley would show up for it, whoever the sponsor was. But that doesn't seem like it's in the offing. So that's what we have to say about that, and we'll be back with more reader questions next week. All right, so looking ahead to this coming week, this is the last week of June leading into the 4th of July weekend. So there's not a lot happening toward the end of the week. I think there's going to be a lot of people leaving town probably. We do start off with a county commission meeting on Monday. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, they'll be talking about this Merit System Council issue. They will also be voting to approve an expanded payment in lieu of taxes incentive for the Nashville developers who are redeveloping the Andrew Johnson building into a boutique hotel. That pilot that was originally granted as a 10-year pilot, where the developers were going to be paying $110,000 a year in lieu of the property taxes they would normally pay, will now be a 17-year pilot at $60,000 a year. And their argument for that is that basically their construction costs have gone up, everything's gotten more expensive, and also they've been waiting more than 5 years at this point since the county, or I guess it's right at 5 years since the county first awarded them this project, and that they've been patient as it's gone through various political wrinkles. And so that is also on Commission's agenda. And then the next day, Scott, on Tuesday, there are several meetings.
Oh, boy, yes. And the first one also has to do with construction. That's the Sports Authority, the city-county board that is going to be building the multi-use stadium just outside the old city. We don't know at this point how quickly they're going to move on it. They put it on hold, and they did that a couple of months ago because of the rising costs. They wanted costs to stabilize. They wanted the supply chain issues that were kind of brought on by the pandemic to stabilize, and all that really hasn't happened. So we're not sure what they're going to be doing moving forward. One of the things that they really need to do to truly move forward is go ahead with a bond issue that would pay for the construction. They are kind of waiting for the green light on that, and it could come this week. I would imagine it'll probably be put off another month because, as I said, those prices haven't stabilized. Also, the African American Equity Restoration Task Force is going to be meeting Tuesday late afternoon. That is the task force that is plans to spend $100 million over the next 7 years to basically increase wealth, within the African American community.
And we should say it's not so much spend as attract, right? Because the task force itself doesn't have any money.
That I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, right. It is. They don't have any money. What their goal is to raise that money through grants and other things, either federal grants or from nonprofits and that sort of thing. And one of the things that they've done since they were formed is they've kind of narrowed their focus down to programs that promote home ownership and programs that promote business ownership. So there are plenty of programs out there like that address those things, and they're hoping. I mean, the overall goal is that people will participate in these programs. They will increase their wealth, and their children will be able to build on that the way that families all across the United States have done for generations.
Generational wealth transfer.
Generational wealth
which
transfer.
African Americans, of course, were literally legally locked out of for centuries in lots of different ways.
Yeah, it's truly been evasive for the African American community, and so this is an attempt to kind of level that playing field. So, and then if that wasn't enough for your Tuesday entertainment, then you have City Council. They're going to be meeting on Tuesday. One of the couple of the big things they're going to be looking at are some charter amendments that Councilwoman Amelia Parker is proposing. Basically, has two avenues that she's going down. One, this goes back to when she ran 3 years ago for her for the 4th district seat and lost. She came in. She tied for second in the primary, and with the tie, City Council is supposed to settle a tie in city elections when they came, but they basically flipped a coin. And
well, they didn't flip a coin; they just took a vote.
Yeah, but it was one of those things that left a really bad taste in her mouth. She is proposing that in the primaries in the future, that it's not the top 2 vote getters, it's the top 2 numbers of votes, no matter how many people get them. So you could have in that situation, then the first place finisher would go on, and both of the second place finishers would go on. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, you could have an unlimited number theoretically of people who move on to the general election, but those there are a couple of amendments that address that. The other is the other issue is one that she has brought up the last couple of years, and that is the budget approval process, which is spelled out in the charter. It's not there's not a whole lot of flexibility. City Council has to approve the budget on first reading. That's required by the charter. Whether you like the budget or not, it's got to pass. It has to be, you have to wrap up. It has to be passed on second reading by the 15th of June. And the fiscal year starts July 1st. So it's got to be passed. And it also same goes with the tax rate.
And if if council doesn't pass a budget at all, the mayor's proposed budget just goes into effect.
Right. Yeah. Regardless of the opposition to it, the mayor's budget does go right into effect. What she would like to do would essentially give council members more time. She wants to eliminate the first reading passage requirement. Also, one of the things that the charter requires is that the budget hearings that the council have to happen after first reading. Well, this way it could happen before first reading, and also to eliminate the end deadline, or not eliminate it, change it from the 15th to June 30th. Mm-hmm. State law apparently allows that, or it seems to. From a non-lawyer standpoint, looking at it, the plain language, basically as long as they pass one, they're good to go. But they've got to do it. You've got to have that and the tax rate in place before the fiscal year, because that's you've got to pay people, you've got to fulfill contracts, you've got to do those sorts of things. So,
and these would have to be voted on, right? These would be charter amendments she's trying to get them on the ballot, basically.
Right. She's trying to get them on the ballot. She's going through council. That's one of the avenues you can use to get a charter amendment on the ballot, is to go through council and get them to pass this. It has to pass on 2 readings, and it would then go on the ballot in November for voters to approve or reject. And it's probably an uphill fight. The first issue, the one of the tie, the tie in election, I don't recall ever, there ever being a tie before this. It could certainly happen, as her race in
2017.
2017 shows. It can happen, but it's very, very rare. So I don't know how much traction there's going to be about that. And the other, with the budget process, I think that there might be an opening for that. I know that Councilwoman Seema Singh, like Parker, would like to have more time and more flexibility for council to look at the budget, make changes in the budget, suggest changes in the budget, and that sort of thing. So there might be a little bit more traction on that, but it's always an uphill battle to change the charter, because the bar is usually pretty high to get any question on the ballot.
Yeah, so. And first, in this case, she would need support from her fellow council members, and then it would need to be approved by voters. And this does speak to Knoxville has what we call a strong mayor system. The
Yes.
mayor is the unitary executive of city government, and has most of the power in city government and also in the budgeting process. And often people who run for city council are dismayed when they get to city council their first budget year and realize really how little power individual council members have to make significant changes in the city budget. And so I don't, Parker is certainly not the first council member to run up against that. I guess the question is just going to be whether, she can build enough support among her fellow council members. She often votes in minorities, 8-1, 7-2 votes where she's on the losing end of city council, and I guess we'll see whether she can muster a majority in this case.
Yeah, the strong mayor government thing is a real roadblock to ambitious city council members as far as making significant changes budget wise, and of course, money is power in a lot of cases, and yeah, the way it's set up, you can't. Council in their voting, they can't cut individual programs or add to individual programs. They can only do it in gross amounts. If they wanted to add a new program to the police department, or they wanted to include money to develop a park or whatever. They can't just go in and say, I want to put $20 million.
This line item,
amount.
For this project.
I want to put $10 million for this project in the budget. It doesn't work that way. They can increase the budget for that department, but it's still up to the mayor and department heads to spend it.
Sure.
So.
Well, we will come back next week and report on how all of that goes.
How it all falls out, yes.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, and thanks as usual to our producer, Lord Seth Barber, here at Barbarian Studios. We'll see you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.